Identifying a noun's gender in German can be tricky, but some patterns can be used. The best way to determine the gender of a noun is to look at the article that precedes it. However, the German articles are affected by the cases, meaning they can be modified under the function of a word. I'm not going to emphasize articles too much because I'll mainly focus on how to determine the gender of a noun. The best way to determine the gender is by looking at an article, such as der, die, and das, which are the definite articles in the nominative case. While it is best to study the articles with nouns that match the gender, I will show some patterns that can be used to identify a noun's gender without articles. One pattern is based on the endings of nouns because they relate to a specific gender. To identify masculine nouns, look at the ending of a noun because most masculine nouns are male beings. Typically, they end in er, n, l, ig, ismus, and more. Some examples are der Lehrer, der Garten, der Apfel, der König, der Kapitalismus. That's one way to identify a masculine noun, but remember that other endings can also be. To identify feminine nouns, look at the ending of a noun, because most feminine nouns are female beings. Typically, they end in e, Heit, or kite, ung, tion, Schaft, and more. Some examples are die Blume, die Freiheit, die Möglichkeit, die Zeitung, die Nation, die Wissenschaft. That's one way to identify a feminine noun, but again, other endings can also be. To identify neuter nouns, look at the ending of a noun, because they're often diminutives or names of young beings. Typically, they end in gen, or line, ment, tum, and more. Some examples are das Häuschen, das Fräulein, das Instrument, das Zentrum, das Eigentum. That's one way to identify a neuter noun, but again, other endings can also be. Furthermore, it's possible to use meaning-based clues to identify a noun's gender, because the natural gender often corresponds to the grammatical gender, especially living beings like male and female animals. It's also possible to look for the plural forms of nouns. For instance, nouns that form plurals by adding n are often feminine, like die Frau, die Frauen. Pluralization can really help in identifying a noun's gender, but it's something that needs to be shown in the 4 German cases in the next videos. For now, I will not elaborate a lot on that. Aside from these patterns, German has specific categories of nouns that can help identify their gender. The names of all days are masculine. Montag, Dienstag, Mittwoch, Donnerstag, Freitag, Samstag, Sonntag. All of these days are masculine because they end in tag, which means day, and tag is a masculine noun. But Mittwoch doesn't end in tag, but it translates to midweek because Wednesday is the middle of the week. Woch is the masculine noun, and therefore Mittwoch is masculine. The names of all months are also masculine. Januar, Februar, März, April, Mai, Juni, Juli, August, September, October, November, December. The names of all seasons are also masculine. Der Winter, der Frühling, der Sommer, der Herbst. This is another way to identify masculine nouns. When it comes to feminine nouns, most names of flowers and trees are feminine. Die Rose, die Tulpe, die Eiche, die Linde. All of these end in e, which further shows why they're feminine. However, there are exceptions, because some tree names can be masculine, especially when they don't end in typical feminine endings, like der Ahorn and der Birnbaum. When it comes to neuter nouns, names of metals, elements, and colors are mainly neuter. Das Messing, das Aluminium, das Kupfer, das Gold, das Silber, das Eisen, das Rot, das Gelb, das Blau, das Schwarz, das Weiß, das Grün. Still, there are exceptions, because some elements are masculine, especially if they end in Stoff, which is substance. Der Wasserstoff, der Sauerstoff. Alongside, the names of car brands are usually masculine, like der BMW, der Audi, der Volkswagen. The names of mountains, lakes, and rivers are generally feminine, like die Alpen, die Elbe, die Weser. Individual mountains and lakes are usually masculine, der Mont Blanc, der Bodensee. Still, there are exceptions, because some mountains are neuter, if they include Gebirge, which means mountain range. Das Erzgebirge. Additionally, German has foreign words and borrowed nouns, and they often take the neuter gender, especially if they refer to an object, place, or concept, rather than a living being. Das Hotel, das Auto, das Radio, das Restaurant. Words referring to languages or collective ideas are neuter. Das English, das Deutsch, das Chaos. Loan words for modern technologies or trends are also neuter. Das Internet, das Smartphone, das Team. Abstract concepts or scientific terms are also neuter, because they come from other languages, like Latin or Greek. Das Problem, das Experiment, das Museum. Still, not all borrowed words are neuter, because gender can depend on the noun's meaning, structure, or similarity to German words. If a foreign word ends in e or a, it may take the feminine gender, like die Garage, die Pizza, die Kamera. These nouns are feminine because their endings resemble German feminine nouns. Another exception is der Computer, and it's masculine because it's perceived as a device or tool. This is how you identify the gender of a German noun. But remember that nouns and articles are affected by the 4 German cases. Every example that I showed with der, die, and das was in the nominative case, so I didn't show their changes in the accusative, dative, or genitive. Considering the 4 German cases, articles, nouns, pronouns, and adjectives can be modified in 4 different ways, and they must be known with the cases, which I'll explain individually in the next videos. I also have not shown the pluralization of the words because, again, they require more explanation, so it's something for the next videos.